Here we go. Almost 6 months in the waiting.
Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to another episode of Bert's Bike. Today, we're going over my brand new 2022 Indian Chief. Now, I've waited a long time to get this bike, and in a short time, I've already put a couple thousand miles on it. So let me tell you what I really think about this motorcycle. Let's get into it. Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's been watching, liking, and subscribing to the channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and I really couldn't have gotten this far without you guys. So thank you so much. And if you're new here to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button because it really helps me make future motorcycle content for you guys that are interested in it. So the first thing we have to cover is why the Indian Chief. Well, after doing tons and tons of research and looking at a bunch of different bikes to figure out what my long-term cruiser would be, I landed on the Indian Chief. And for two very specific reasons. One, I was looking around for sort of a big mid-size cruiser, something that would be comfortable enough to be a daily driver, but also something that I could take a long-haul highway trip on and not feel like I'm just taxing the bike. And the second reason is obviously the styling of the motorcycle. If you've done some research on this, you'll know that Indian puts styling at the top of the list. And personally, I feel they knocked it out of the park. So as much as I love Indian motorcycles, and as much as I love this bike and I'm totally enamored with it, there were a few things that happened right out of the gate that I'll touch on in this video. So let's start with the pros, and the obvious thing is this bike looks amazing. The pictures look good, but when you see the bike in real life, you really notice how they just cram this big engine into this frame. And in my opinion, it's a work of art. The frame is thick and chunky, and when you're sitting on the bike, you definitely feel a sense of stability and rigidness. For as wide and massive as the engine is, when you're riding, it doesn't really get in the way. However, if you're used to gripping the tank with your legs, you'll probably notice it. Another thing I have to give Indian credit for is the headlight design. Now, in my opinion, it's really hard to stray from just a round headlight design or a round halo within the headlight, but I think Indian has really come up with something different and unique here. I personally love the stance of the bike. It definitely has a more aggressive, muscly look to it, especially with the engine, the big tank, as well as the chopped fender work really well together. I also love the look of these huge exhaust pipes. I think most people would want to change them out for something smaller or more streamlined, but I absolutely love the way it makes the bike look. Also, another thing I love are these mag wheels on the bike. Now, I am a big fan of the way spokes look, but these mag wheels definitely look amazing. And also, it's a lot easier to fix a puncture on the road when you have mags versus having to change out the entire tube with spokes. Just some things to mention is that the bike is equipped with LEDs all around as standard, and also the tires are Pirelli Night Dragons. And I feel that the Night Dragons really let you lean into a turn comfortably, and I've ridden quite a few miles in the wet with these and I didn't really have any problems at all. Alright, so let's hear that exhaust note. So as you can tell, there's a really good tone to the sound, although it's not very loud, and the engine whine is definitely louder than the pipes. The pipes also sit further back from the rider, so when you're actually at speed, it's kind of hard to hear them because they sit so far behind you. Alright, so let's talk about ergonomics on the motorcycle. So when you walk up to it, you'll notice that it does have a very low seat height. But when you swing your leg over it and pick up the bike, you really notice how low the center of gravity is. That low center of gravity really makes the bike easy to pick up off the side stand, easy to move around in your garage, but most importantly, it makes the bike very flickable and maneuverable for its weight. For size reference, I'm 6'1" and about 195, and I have a 32-inch inseam. And I feel that if you're any taller than me, you're probably going to want the version of the bike with forward controls versus the mid controls that I got. And don't get me wrong, I have seen some taller riders over 6'1" that actually love the mid control setup on this. The Chief does come in quite a few configurations, but I think the most important thing that you need to be looking at are the ergonomics. So if you want the drag bars and mid controls, or if you want the mini apes and forward controls. Now I have ridden the version with the mini apes and forward controls, and I have to say I think most people will prefer that stance more than the mid controls and the drag bars. And in my opinion, the mini apes and forward controls are more comfortable, but it really changes the feel of the ride from this roadster, cruiser, aggressive type stance to this more chilled out recliner type vibe. So what's it like to ride this motorcycle? So the thing you immediately notice once you get moving is how easy it is to maneuver this bike at speed or even at a low speed setting. It usually takes me a little while to get comfortable like doing tight maneuvers on a new motorcycle, but after a couple of rides during the day, I felt pretty confident that I could throw it around pretty easily. And once you start moving and giving it some gas, you really notice how much power this 1811cc engine really has. One thing you'll notice when you start moving on the bike from a stop position is just how much play there is in the throttle. So in the first 10% or so of the throttle, there's very little input, so you have to be very intentional about feathering your clutch and giving it gas on a takeoff. However, this bike does have 3 rider modes: Sport, Standard, and Touring. So once you throw it in Sport mode, the throttle response becomes very immediate, and the bike kind of becomes a rocket ship. So if you're used to a tight, snappy, and responsive throttle, this might be the mode for you. In fact, a lot of guys on the Chief forum keep it in Sport mode all the time. But for my type of riding, I really feel that Standard mode is the sweet spot for most applications. Now let's talk about this seat. So the seat, upon first sitting on it, seems pretty soft and comfortable for, let's say, anything sub 100 miles. So if you're planning on doing some serious touring, you're probably looking at a seat upgrade. Now, serious miles can be done on the stock seat. I've done it. I've done hundreds of miles in a day, but an upgraded seat will definitely be worth your time. So let's move on to suspension. Now, when you ride this motorcycle on just a regular road with, just minor imperfections, the suspension does glide pretty good over it. But if you hit any big bumps, it is very bouncy, and the back end tends to kind of buck a little bit. But since this bike does have the mid-control setup, it is pretty easy to just kind of lift up when you see a bump coming. So one fun fact about the suspension is it's pretty noisy. So when you hit a bump, you definitely feel some kind of rattling around, and also you'll hear the suspension click when it compresses. Now, according to Indian, it doesn't affect the bike at all, but some bikes have shipped with excessive noise, and Indian has already put out a fix for the problem. So if you got a first run bike, you probably have to get that going, but if you get a later run bike like I got, it probably won't be an issue. However, mine was an issue, and they ended up replacing the front forks. And this didn't completely eliminate the issue, but it definitely took a lot of the noise out, and the clicking is definitely reduced. So I don't know if that's just a thing, because my Scout had a similar issue as well when I owned it. So if you know about that, please leave a comment below. So moving up on the bike, the drag bars, to my surprise, are very, very comfortable. Even though I'm a taller guy, I feel like they're positioned just right, and whoever did my setup on this bike before I got it, everything was pretty much in a perfect position for me. The mirrors are in the right spot, the roll of the bars are in the right spot. And speaking of the mirrors, you definitely have a good field of view around you and behind you. Your shoulder cuts off maybe like 15% of the mirror, so if you're really broad-chested, you're probably going to have to find some other option or get some mirror extenders to push out further. So on a side note on this motorcycle, you can put bar ends on only the left side, but because the bike is ride-by-wire, that mechanism sits in the right handlebar, so a right-hand bar end mirror is a no-go. So let's talk about this headlight. It does look awesome, and it's very bright. However, when you're riding at night, there is a very sharp cutoff, so you're going to have to position this where you can see down the road with your low beams, but then when you turn on your brights, you're not hitting the trees. Mine was set low from the factory, and I'm going to have to kind of angle it up a little bit. Also, when you use the high beam, it's more of a focused beam than an actual spread of light. All in all, I think it's a very good headlight, and after I make my adjustments and lift it up a little bit, I think it'll be perfect. So with all this said, this bike is a blast to ride. It's so hard to explain the feeling you get when you ride this motorcycle, so you definitely need to go find one to test drive. And after living with it for a couple thousand miles, I still love it. I guess the best way to explain this is every time you get on this motorcycle, it's like an event happening. And when you're not on the bike, you're always thinking about riding it again. And after taking it out and walking away, you're always going to be looking back at it and doing a double take. I'm constantly getting asked questions and also getting compliments on how this bike looks. With as much as I love this motorcycle, there are no perfect motorcycles, and every bike has their quirks and issues. So let's move on to the cons, and some things you might just like to know if you're in the market for this bike. So as cool and awesome as the bike looks and performs, there are a few things that you notice on the fit and finish side. And in the cruiser world, this is high currency. All in all, Indian does use quality components, and the fit and finish is definitely really good. However, I would say that last maybe like 5%, you kind of notice small things, especially when you go to clean and wash the bike. So on my particular motorcycle, the left side down tube from the factory had some scratches in it, and also some paint flaking on the upper portion of it. Also, when you unscrew the fuel cap, you'll notice the paint underneath there is kind of sloppy and inconsistent. Also, my primary cover had little chips of paint missing from it, and also the primary gasket was pinched from the factory, and I developed a slow leak in the first few hundred miles. Lastly, the cooling fins on my engine that are right by the header pipe, 3 of those were very sharp and were not deburred from the factory. Now, I don't go looking for stuff like this, but when I was cleaning the bike, my towel actually got caught on it and kind of ripped it a little bit, and that's how I noticed it. Now, all these small things on their own were not such a big deal, but after they accumulated, I'm not gonna lie, it got to me a little bit and had me questioning my purchase. Now, to Indian's credit, they definitely came through with the warranty, and the customer service was really good, both from corporate and also the dealership was great. However, even getting some of the new parts in, like the forks and the tank, there were still some paint issues here and there. So, all in all, I'd have to give Indian an 8 or an 8.5 on fit and finish. And namely because Indian is marketing themselves as a premium brand that competes directly with Harley-Davidson. And if you compare the two, Indian does fall short just a little bit on that fit and finish. Like when you ride a Harley, everything feels very solid, and for the Indian, for like 95% of the bike it does, but where it falls short are those little detail issues with the paint, and also like the switch housings where the controls are. They do feel a little flimsy and plasticky, a little delicate feeling. So moving on to maybe another con is the bike is very cold-blooded. And what I mean by that is that when you start up the bike, it takes a long time for it to actually get warm. So if you start up the bike and even wait 30 seconds to a minute, the first 5-10 minutes of riding, the gear shifts, namely from 1, 2, and 3 are a little stiff, and you kind of gotta put a little bit more oomph into them. Once the bike is completely warm, everything is very, very smooth and easy going. And another thing about this cold-bloodedness is if the bike has been sitting for a long time, or if there's like a big temperature drop during the day, sometimes it'll take a couple of cranks for the bike to start up. So I've put about 2,500 miles on the bike, or approaching that anyway, and it's probably had to do this extended cranking for maybe like 3 to 4 times since I've owned it. But when this happens, it's either the bike has been sitting or there's been a temperature drop, and not even a drastic one. And personally, I'm not a mechanic, and I don't know if it's maybe where the bike is in the stroke of the engine when you go to crank it, but those are the conditions that I've noticed where I've had to maybe try 2 to 3 times to get the bike to start up. And to be fair, almost every bike I've owned or ridden has at some point had a flame out where you would have to try a couple of times to crank the bike over. I think it's probably just an EPA thing where these bikes are shipping super lean from the factory. Again, I'm not a mechanic, so if you are one and you do know what's going on, why some of these bikes are flaming out on startup or inconsistent starting, please leave a comment below. And in making this video, I got an update from the dealer saying that they think the intermittent starting issue could be related to a faulty or intermittent fuel pump losing pressure. So we'll see how that goes. They did order me a new fuel pump under warranty, so we'll see if that relieves the issue. Honestly though, I just think it's the way the bike is. It just takes a couple cranks to start it sometimes. Lastly, let's talk about fuel economy. And to my surprise, the bike gets excellent fuel economy for being an 1800cc motorcycle. For my daily riding, on average, I'm getting about 43, 44 miles per gallon. And when I take it on a long trip, I've gotten as high as 56. But I'm usually in the low 50s on a long trip. And this is just riding the bike normally. But if you're really heavy on the throttle, you're probably going to get in the mid-30s. So with all this said, all in all, I've had the bike about 2,500 miles and plan to keep it for a lot longer. So even though I've had these small issues here and there, I feel like this is one of the better bikes that I've owned. And as you can see, I've already started accessorizing it, and I have some more things coming for it that I'll probably do some videos on as well, so stay tuned to the channel for that. And if you like what you see here and like what you're hearing, please leave a like and subscribe and comment down below. I do read and respond to most comments, so if you have a question or a concern about my Indian Chief, or if you're thinking about buying one, don't hesitate to leave a comment. I would greatly appreciate that. Well, guys and gals, that's about it. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, so thank you very much for watching. This is Bert's Bike, and I'll catch you on the next one.